You cost this house more than you're worth. Ellie. Ruth Smythe did not raise her voice. She never needed to. She sat behind the wide oak desk. Fingers folded. Eyes fixed on the ledger as if Ellie's life were nothing more than a column of ink. She read the numbers aloud. Food. Cloth. Medicine. Years of shelter, each word tightening like a noose. You've been sent out 6 times. Ruth continued calmly. 6 times returned. Always within the week. Ellie stood with her hands clasped in front of her, shoulders rounded, already shrinking inside herself. She did not argue. She had learned long ago that silence was cheaper than defiance. There is one last place, Ruth said at last. A ranch outside Red Willow Crossing. A man who needs labor. Ellie lifted her eyes. Ruth leaned forward then, her voice lowering. And listen carefully. If you come back again, I won't send you anywhere. I'll sell you to whoever pays, and I won't ask what they intend to do with you. The room went very still. Ellie nodded. Because this was no longer about work. It was about survival. Before we continue, if you feel connected to these characters and their struggle, know that you are not just watching, you are walking beside them. Like, share, and subscribe to keep traveling these forgotten roads with us. One story at a time. Red Willow Crossing lay where the river bent like a tired spine, its banks lined with rust-colored willows that shed their leaves early and without ceremony. By late autumn, the settlement smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, of horses and cold iron. Wagons came through less often now. Those who stayed learned to endure. Those who could not were quietly pushed aside. Ellie rode out of town at dawn in the back of a supply wagon. The house of charity shrinking behind her until it became just another gray shape swallowed by fog. She did not look back. She never did. Looking back only made it harder to keep walking forward. Her body moved with the caution of someone long accustomed to being watched. Every step, every breath carried the memory of judgment. She was large, soft, where the world preferred sharp edges, and she had learned how quickly softness became a reason for cruelty. Ellie kept her eyes lowered, her hands busy, her voice small. People who took up less space were easier to tolerate. That was the rule she had survived by. The road curved along the river for miles before turning rough and narrow. By the time the wagon stopped, the sun was already sinking low, bleeding amber light across open land. The Whitaker ranch sat apart from everything else, fenced fields, a weather-beaten house, and a long dark barn that seemed to breathe its own shadows. Jack Whitaker lived there alone. Those in town spoke his name carefully. A man who kept to himself. A man who did not drink at the saloon or sit in church pews. A man whose father had died years ago and whose land had grown quieter ever since. Some said he was hard. Others said he simply did not care enough to pretend otherwise. Ellie felt him before she saw him. He stepped out from the barn as the wagon rolled away. Tall and broad, his presence grounded like something carved from the land itself. His coat was worn, his boots scarred by years of use. Dark stubble lined his jaw, and his eyes sharp, assessing missed nothing. He held a folded letter in one hand, already creased where his fingers had tightened. Behind him, from deep within the barn, came the sound of movement, a heavy thud. Wood groaned, then a low, furious snort that sent a shiver through Ellie's spine. Jack did not turn toward the sound, but something in him went rigid all the same. "That'll be Storm," one of the men in town had once muttered. "Best not get too close." Ellie stood alone in the yard, her small bag at her feet, the weight of Ruth Smythe's warning pressing down on her chest. She did not know Jack Whitaker yet, did not know the grief buried in his silence or the history locked behind the barn doors. She only knew this much: if this place sent her away, there would be no coming back, and Red Willow Crossing would not be the worst fate waiting for her. Jack Whitaker unfolded the letter without offering Ellie a seat, without so much as acknowledging the long road dust clinging to her skirts. The paper rasped in the quiet yard. Each line he read, tightening his mouth further. "They told me you were experienced," he said at last. His voice was calm, almost controlled, which somehow made it worse. "Said you'd handled stock. Said you could manage a barn." Ellie stood where the wagon had dropped her, hands folded tightly at her waist. She had learned not to move too much in moments like this. Movement invited scrutiny. Scrutiny led to rejection. "I can work," she said softly. "I always do." Jack finally looked up. His gaze traveled over her in one slow, measured pass, not with cruelty, not with hunger, but with the same distant appraisal she had seen 100 times before. The look employers gave just before they decided she would not last. "That's not what I asked." From the depths of the barn came a sudden, violent crash. Wood shuddered. A furious scream tore through the air. Animal and unrestrained, Ellie flinched hard, her shoulders drawing inward before she could stop herself. Jack didn't turn, but his jaw tightened. "You ever worked with horses?" he asked. The question dragged memories up from places Ellie kept buried. Kitchens where women whispered behind her back. Farmyards where men stopped watching her hands and started watching her body with thinly veiled disgust. The first week, always the first week when hope still flickered. Right before it died. "No," she said, "sir." Jack's breath left him in a short, humorless sound. "They sent you as a joke." The words did not strike her like a slap. They sank. Ellie felt them settle into her chest. Heavy and familiar. Pressing against truths she had never allowed herself to say out loud. A joke. That was why the smiles had always come too quickly. Why promises were made so easily. Why she was always returned with polite apologies and vague excuses. Too slow, not a good fit, distracts the other workers. No one ever said what they really meant. She saw it all again in a rush, the way a butcher's wife had watched her eat. Then, quietly taken the bread away on the third day. The farmer who had sent her back before Sunday service, unwilling to be seen employing her. The cook who had laughed and said, "We thought you'd be tougher than you look." Ellie had stopped believing in malice a long time ago. It was easier to think people simply did not know what to do with her. But a joke meant intent. It meant someone had looked at her life and decided her fear was amusing. Jack folded the letter sharply, as if crushing it between his fingers might erase the insult. "I asked for help," he said. Someone who knew the work. Someone who wouldn't get themselves killed. Another crash thundered from the barn. Dust spilled from the rafters. Ellie's stomach twisted. She nodded once, automatically, as if accepting blame for something she had never chosen. "I didn't know," she said. "They told me barn work. That's all." Jack turned toward the house. Something inside her broke loose then, not loudly, not in tears, but in a sudden, terrible clarity. Ruth Smythe's voice echoed in her mind. The quiet certainty of it, the promise of what would happen next. If she left this place, she would not be sent out again. She would be sold. "Please." The words slipped out, raw and unguarded. Jack stopped. Ellie took a step forward, then another, panic flooding her limbs. Her knees gave way before she reached him. She fell to the ground, skirts soiling, palms pressed flat into the dirt as if the earth itself might keep her here. "I know I'm not what you wanted," she said, her voice shaking despite her efforts. "I know what I look like. I know what people think, but if I leave," her breath hitched. She forced the words through. "I won't be sent somewhere else." Jack turned. Ellie lifted her face, and for the first time, she did not try to hide the fear. It had lived in her too long for that. She was not begging for kindness. She was begging not to disappear. Behind Jack's eyes, something shifted. Winter was coming. The barn needed tending. And the woman kneeling in his yard was not asking for mercy. She was asking for the chance to survive. Jack did not answer Ellie right away. He stood there with the house at his back and the barn breathing behind him, weighing something heavier than the woman kneeling in the dirt. The wind moved through the willows along the river, carrying the smell of cold water and dying leaves. Winter was close enough to feel in the bones. "Get up," he said at last. Ellie obeyed at once, scrambling to her feet, brushing dirt from her skirts with shaking hands. She did not thank him. Gratitude, she had learned, could sound like obligation. An obligation made it easier for people to take things back. "You stay," Jack went on. "You work. You follow my rules." He turned toward the barn. "And you keep away from Storm. That horse will kill you if you don't." Ellie nodded. "Once. Then again, yes, sir." He handed her a pitchfork without ceremony and pointed to the nearest stall. "Muck it out, all of them." Before dark, the work was worse than she expected. The stalls were heavy with old bedding, soaked through and frozen in places. The smell sharp enough to sting her eyes. Ellie drove the pitchfork down again and again, using her weight to pry the straw loose, muscles burning in protest. The wheelbarrow filled too quickly, and every load felt like a test she was already failing. Jack did not help. He watched from the aisle at first, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Ellie felt his presence like heat at her back, the familiar pressure of being measured. She kept her head down. People were kinder when you didn't make them look too closely. By midday, her hands were blistered raw beneath borrowed gloves. Her breath came in short bursts. She did not stop. She could not afford to. The barn itself seemed alive in a way she did not understand yet. It groaned and shifted with every change in temperature. Dust motes drifted in pale columns of light. And always, at the far end, behind reinforced boards and iron hardware, something moved. Storm. Ellie heard him long before she saw him. A scrape of hoof against wood. A low, warning sound that vibrated through her chest. She stayed well clear of the last stall, remembering Jack's words, even as curiosity tugged at her. In the late afternoon, when her arms trembled too badly to lift the pitchfork cleanly, Ellie began to hum. She didn't plan it. The sound slipped out of her without thought, low and unadorned. A tune she half remembered from nowhere in particular. Something slow enough to breathe to. Something steady. The barn changed. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but the tension eased, like a held breath finally released. Ellie worked and hummed and worked, her voice threading through the space between stalls. It was not a happy sound. It carried sorrow in it. But it was gentle, unafraid. From the far end of the barn, Storm went still. Jack noticed. He had been repairing a broken latch near the tack room when the sound reached him. He straightened slowly, listening. The hum rose and fell, steady as a heartbeat. He glanced toward the last stall, expecting the usual violence. There was none. Storm stood quiet, head low, ears angled toward the sound. Jack said nothing. He went back to his work. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Ellie could survive. Up before dawn, cold water on her face, work until her arms screamed and her back ached in places she hadn't known could ache. Jack added tasks without warning, hauling feed sacks, scrubbing troughs, reorganizing tack by memory alone. Ellie did them all, slowly at first, then faster. She learned his system because she had to, learned where each bridle hung, which saddle rubbed which horse, how the grain was measured and when. Jack corrected her once. He did not repeat himself, and always. When the barn grew quiet and the weight of the day pressed down hardest, Ellie sang, sometimes just a hum, sometimes words, soft and old-sounding, shaped more by feeling than meaning. She sang while she worked, while she rested, while she swept the aisle clean at dusk. The sound became part of the place, like the creak of beams or the rustle of straw. Storm listened. He did not charge the door when she passed, did not scream when she paused nearby. Once, when she was sweeping too close to his stall without realizing it. Ellie froze, heart pounding, expecting the explosion. It didn't come. Instead, Storm's breathing slowed, heavy and controlled. Ellie backed away carefully, pulse roaring in her ears, and sang until her hands stopped shaking. Jack watched from the doorway, something tightening behind his ribs. He began to leave small things where she would find them. A jar of salve for her hands, a wool scarf folded on the rail near her cot in the storage room. He did not explain. She did not ask. They spoke little. When they did, it was about work. But the space between them shifted, subtly, day by day. Ellie learned the sound of Jack's footsteps. Jack learned the cadence of her voice. Trust grew, not through declarations, but through presence. One evening, as the sky burned red over the river, Ellie finished her chores and stood in the aisle, singing softly to herself. Jack paused on his way past, leaning one shoulder against a post. "You always do that," he said. Ellie startled, the song breaking off mid-note. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to know." He shook his head once. "Don't stop." She hesitated, then began again, quieter this time. Jack listened until the last note faded into the settling dark. Storm did not move. Neither did Jack. For the first time since his father's death, the barn did not feel like a grave. And Ellie, bent and bruised and aching, felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not hope, but the fragile beginning of it. The wagon arrived just after noon. Ellie heard it before she saw it, the slow grind of wheels against packed dirt, the uneven rhythm of a load not meant to linger. Her hands tightened around the broom handle as the sound cut through the familiar hush of the barn. Storm shifted at the far end. Sensing the disturbance, a low warning rumbling in his chest, Jack stepped out of the house as the wagon rolled into the yard. Ruth Smythe descended first. She wore a dark dress unsuited to mud or labor, its fabric stiff with respectability. Her boots did not touch the dirt until she was certain of her footing. Behind her climbed down a man Ellie had never seen before, lean, sharp-faced, his eyes restless, in a way that made her skin crawl. He smiled too easily, as if the world existed to be bargained with. Ruth did not look at Ellie right away. She addressed Jack, her voice crisp, practiced. "Well," she said, "I see you've kept her." Jack did not move aside. He stood between Ruth Smythe and the barn, broad as the doorway behind him. "She's working," he said. "You've no business here." Ruth's lips curved faintly. "On the contrary, I have every business here." She turned then, finally, and fixed Ellie with a cool, assessing gaze. "You've lasted longer than expected." Ellie felt her chest tighten. The old instinct rose to lower her eyes, to make herself small. She forced herself to remain still. Ruth gestured toward the man beside her. "This is Edgar Slade," she said. "A trader. He has interests along the river, practical ones." Edgar tipped his hat, his eyes sliding over Ellie with open calculation. "Ma'am," he drawled, "you look sturdier up close." Ellie's stomach turned. "She's not for sale," Jack said sharply. Ruth gave a small, humorless laugh. "You misunderstand. She has always been for sale. The question was only the price." Ellie's breath came shallow now. "You said this was work," she said, her voice unsteady but audible. "You said I said it was your last chance." Ruth cut in, "And I was generous enough to give it to you." Jack took a step forward. "You threaten people like that often." Ruth's eyes flicked to him, then back to Ellie. "Only when kindness fails." Her voice hardened. "You owe this house. Girl, years of food, shelter, care. Debts don't vanish because you sing prettily in a barn." Edgar chuckled softly. "I don't mind debt," he said. "Makes folks easier to handle." Jack moved then, placing himself fully between Ellie and the wagon. "Get off my land." Ruth's smile vanished. "You don't get to play the hero," she said. "You signed for labor, temporary placement, nothing more." "She's done the work," Jack said. "Every day. Ask your own eyes." Ruth's gaze sharpened. "Has she?" She turned to Ellie again. "Tell me, then, have you completed every duty outlined in your placement?" Ellie hesitated. She felt Jack's presence at her back, solid and steady, but the words stuck, because Ruth Smythe did not ask questions she did not already know the answer to. "The barn," Ruth continued, "the stock, the handling of all animals under this roof." Storm slammed his weight against the stall door. The sound cracked through the air, like a gunshot. Dust rained from the rafters. Edgar took an involuntary step back, swearing under his breath. Ruth's eyes gleamed. "Ah," she said softly. "That one." Jack's jaw clenched. "You know damn well." Ruth lifted a hand. "The horse," she said, enunciating each word, "was included in the agreement. Care and management of the animals. All of them." She tilted her head. "Unless you mean to claim she's been spared the hardest part." Ellie felt the ground sway beneath her feet. "That horse is dangerous," Jack said. "You sent her here knowing that." Ruth shrugged. "I sent her here to work. If she cannot, then the placement has failed." She gestured to Edgar. "In which case, I reclaim what is mine." Edgar's smile returned, slow and hungry. "I've got Silver ready," he said. "No paperwork trouble. I take her as is." Something cold and fierce rose in Ellie's chest, burning through the fear. "No," she said. The word surprised even her. Ruth's brows lifted. "Excuse me," Ellie took a step forward, her hands shaking but her voice steadier now. "I've worked. Every stall, every trough, every day. I didn't refuse anything. That horse," Ruth said sharply, "has been kept away from you." Ellie swallowed. She could feel Storm's restless energy thrumming through the barn. "He listens to me." Ruth laughed outright. "Listen," she shook her head. "This is not a lullaby contest, girl. This is proof." Jack turned to Ellie. "You don't have to." "Yes," she said quietly. "I do." She stepped past him. The yard seemed to hold its breath as Ellie walked toward the barn doors. Edgar muttered something under his breath. Ruth folded her arms, satisfied, certain. Storm erupted the moment Ellie reached the aisle. He screamed, a sound raw and furious, rearing against the reinforced boards. Hooves struck wood with bone-jarring force. Edgar cursed and retreated further. Ruth smiled thinly, triumphant. "There," she said. "That is your answer." Ellie stopped. She did not run. She did not shout. She lifted her chin, closed her eyes, and sang. The sound carried low, steady, unadorned. The same song she had given the barn each evening. The same cadence that had threaded itself into the wood and dust. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied, filling the space between her and the beast. Storm faltered. Another scream tore from his throat, but weaker this time. His hooves struck once more, then stilled. Ellie moved closer, one careful step at a time, her hand lifting as her song softened. The horse's breathing slowed. Dust settled. Ellie laid her palm against his neck. Storm stood. Silence fell over the yard. Ruth Smythe stared, her mouth opening, then closing again. No words came. Ellie turned back, her voice gone but her spine straight. "I did the work," she said. "All of it." Jack exhaled, a sound like release. Ruth's face hardened into something ugly. She spun toward Edgar. "We're leaving." Edgar hesitated. "But now." She climbed back into the wagon without another glance at Ellie. As the wheels began to turn, Ruth leaned out once, her voice sharp with spite. "This isn't finished." Ellie watched the wagon disappear down the road. For the first time in her life, the threat did not follow her. Jack stepped to her seat, close enough that she could feel his warmth. He did not touch her, but he stayed, and Storm lowered his head, calm at last, as if he had chosen to. The yard stayed quiet long after the wagon disappeared down the road. Ellie stood where she was, one hand still resting against Storm's neck. Her breath slow, now that the shaking had finally begun to ease. The song had left her throat raw, as if it had taken something with it when it went. Around them, the ranch seemed to listen, to wait, uncertain of what this silence meant. Jack was the first to move. He crossed the aisle and slid the stall door shut, securing the latch with hands that no longer trembled. Only then did he turn back to Ellie, up close. His face looked different than it had an hour ago, less carved from stone, more worn by something older and deeper. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Ellie lowered her hand. suddenly unsure where to put it. Yes, she answered quietly. I did. They stood there for a moment, neither of them willing to rush past what had just happened. Outside, the light had shifted, the afternoon sun tilting westward, throwing long bars of gold across the barn floor. Jack leaned against the post beside her. She meant what she said. He told her about selling you. Ellie nodded once. I know. He waited, giving her space she wasn't used to being offered. When she spoke again, it was without looking at him. She never said it the first times. Ellie said, only later. When she knew I had nowhere else to go, her fingers curled against her palm. This time she wanted me afraid enough not to come back. Jack's jaw tightened. That woman has no right. She has power. Ellie interrupted softly. Or she did. The barn creaked as it settled. Storm shifted once behind the door, then went still again, the worst of his fury spent. Jack stared at the floor for a long moment before speaking again. My father used to sing to that horse. Ellie looked up, surprised. Not words. Jack went on. Just sound. Low. Steady. He said animals didn't need meaning they needed calm. His voice roughened. Storm was his favorite. He trusted him more than any man alive. Ellie waited. They were hunting along the river bend. Jack said. The ground gave way. Storm slipped. My father didn't. He swallowed hard. I thought if I kept the horse, if I punished him long enough, it would make sense of it. Ellie felt something settle painfully into place. You weren't punishing him, she said gently. You were punishing yourself. Jack didn't deny it. For a while, neither of them spoke. The barn was no longer a place of fear now, but of memory heavy, but survivable. What happens next? Ellie asked at last. Jack turned to her fully. If you want to stay, he said, choosing each word carefully, you stay. Not because you're useful, not because someone else tried to claim you, because this is your place if you choose it. Ellie searched his face for anything that resembled obligation or pity. She found neither. And if I leave, she asked. Jack nodded once. Then I'll make sure you leave free. The word echoed inside her. Free. Ellie thought of the ledger on Ruth Smythe's desk, of the men who had returned her with apologies and closed doors, of the wagon disappearing down the road. She let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding for years. I want to stay, she said, but not as something owned. Jack's mouth curved not into a smile. Exactly, but into something close enough to one. Good, he said. Neither do I. That evening, they sat on the steps of the house as the sky darkened over Red Willow Crossing. Jack brought out 2 tin cups and filled them with water from the pump. They drank in companionable quiet, the kind that didn't ask anything in return. From the barn, Storm let out a low, almost gentle sound. Ellie smiled faintly. He's listening. Jack followed her gaze. So am I. The night settled around them, cool and steady, and for the first time since Ellie could remember, the future did not feel like a threat waiting in the dark. It felt like a choice. Morning came soft over Red Willow Crossing. A thin veil of mist clung to the river, turning the willows pale and unreal, as if the land itself had not quite decided whether it belonged to night or day. Ellie was already in the barn, moving through her chores with the quiet confidence that had grown into her bones. Storm watched her from his stall. Head lowered, ears forward. Calm in a way he had never been before. She was humming when Jack entered. He stopped just inside the doorway and listened. He had learned the sound of her voice the way a man learns the weather by instinct, by feel. When she noticed him, Ellie fell silent at once. A reflex she had not yet unlearned. You don't have to stop, Jack said. She hesitated, then finished the tune softly before setting the bucket aside. Did you need something? Jack crossed the aisle slowly. as if the words he carried weighed more than he'd expected. He rested a hand on the stall door, fingers brushing the worn wood. "I keep thinking about something I made to you," he began. Ellie's shoulders tensed, despite herself. She remembered too well. "They sent you as a joke," Jack said, not looking at her. "I thought that was all you were, what they meant you to be." Ellie lowered her eyes. Even now, the words still knew how to find the old bruises. Jack turned to face her then. "I was wrong." She looked up. "I've lived most of my life thinking loss was the only thing I was good at," he continued. "I lost my father. I lost this place for a while, even standing right in it. I thought anything unexpected was something to be endured, not kept." He exhaled, slow and steady. "When you came here, I thought you were another burden someone had thrown at my door. A mistake I'd have to clean up." Ellie's fingers curled into her skirt. She did not interrupt him. "But somewhere between the work and the singing, between watching you stand your ground and watching Storm choose you," Jack's voice faltered, just slightly, "I realized something." He stepped closer, close enough now that Ellie could see the truth in his eyes, bare and unguarded. "What I thought was a joke," he said quietly, "was the only good thing that's found me by surprise in years." Ellie's breath caught. "You're not what they sent," Jack went on. "You're what I didn't know I was missing," he swallowed. "A treasure I nearly turned away because I didn't recognize its worth." The word settled between them, treasure, not said lightly, not said carelessly. Ellie felt tears sting, sudden and sharp. "I've never been anyone's anything like that," she whispered. Jack lifted a hand, stopping just short of touching her cheek, giving her the space to choose. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Not work, not gratitude, not feeling the same." She looked at his hand, then back at his face. Slowly, deliberately, Ellie closed the distance herself. She rested her forehead against his chest, light as a question. "I was sent here to be broken," she said. "And somehow, I wasn't." Jack's hand came down then, steady and warm against her back, not claiming, not taking, just holding. Outside, the river moved on, patient and sure. Storm let out a low, contented sound from his stall. And in the quiet barn, at Red Willow Crossing, two people who had both been treated as losses finally understood they had found something worth keeping.